Welcome to the Aligned Life, the Goddess Life, where we dive into living life fully aligned, mind, body, and spirit, at peace and unbothered. I'm Hallie, and I'm here with Tosh, a good friend of mine and spiritual practitioner, a very connected being in soul who has found this absolutely beautiful little flower of life in introspection. I can't even explain it. Why don't you tell us a bit about your path and who you are and how you found yourself?
Well, first of all, thank you for that. It's been a long, long journey. Probably all started when I was a teenager, where I found myself attracted to Wicca. That was my first introduction to anything spiritual. My grandmother was a big fan of Sylvia Browne, my mom too. And then so I learned about psychics that way. But from there, it was kind of me fumbling in the dark. I had nobody telling me how to do this, what to do. So a lot of it, I made it up. And as a teenager, I've got notebooks that are there's just silliness in there, completely made up silliness. But that's where it starts. It's that spark of imagination, I think. And then as I got old enough to do my own research, go to the bookstore and find New Age books on metaphysics and witchcraft, I started getting a feel for my place in it all.
That makes sense. I think that's a similar path to probably a few of our listeners. There was a whole section of life where those of us who find ourselves between like the ages of, let's say, like 26 and 38, somewhere in there, where all we had were the bookstores. Like, I remember so vividly going to the bookstores in the mall and picking up books, not knowing the difference between Druidry and Wicca, and just picking them all up and being like, I'm going to absorb these into my being.
I my dad was an apostolic Christian pastor, so bringing materials like that into the house was forbidden. So a lot of my research was done online. There was this awful but also hilarious website called bookofspells.com, and I don't know if it's even a real site anymore, but you could go on there and post anything. And if I were to go back there today, I would find, or if it still existed, I'd be able to pick out what spells are what I would call real spells today that any practitioner might consider to be have some basis in reality. But then there were other ones where it was like how to become a mermaid or how to be a werewolf and silly, just imaginary things like that. But
Oh, yeah.
when you're starting, you don't know the difference. Or at least I didn't know the difference between real spell work and things in Hollywood.
Oh, yeah. I think that is we all want to follow this calling that we have inside of us. And a lot of times it's not fitting into this box that people have built in society. And so those identities as vampiric or being lycanthropic or werewolf appeal so heavily to people who are like, none of this really feels like me.
Oh, absolutely. That was the very start, I suppose, of a journey that finally arrived at a destination maybe 2 years ago. I started off, of course, as I'm going to use air quotes for witch because I don't mean how people in the metaphysical community refer to themselves as witches. Good witches. That's like, I'm one of those. Till I was like, no, now I'm a vampire. And there are people out there who do. I read the Vampire Codex. I know people who, within, you could call it the real vampire community. And in talking with some of those people, I found the Therian community. And that's sort of like the werewolf side, if you want to call it the real werewolf side of metaphysics. And I kind of dabbled in both until I got to a point where I got frustrated and I was trying to cut away the BS. What is Hollywood? What is fake? And then where is real magic? Where is real talent? Where is this calling? And honestly, I didn't find the answer to that until a couple of years ago. I was sitting there scrolling Facebook going, I wish I could find a witch who's older than me, who's been doing this forever, who can do a reading for me and tell me why I feel different from other people. Why don't I feel like I'm just a human, essentially? And trying to separate myself from the answer to that doesn't have to mean that I'm a vampire, that I'm a Therian, that I'm something inhuman. It doesn't have to mean that because we're all human. We're here in human vessels living a human mortal experience. So it wouldn't matter. I could run around all outside and scream, I'm a god, but that's not going to make me call lightning. So I was trying to find out where is reality and what's my reality and my place in it. And I got a reading from I'm trying to think of the word, a Romani woman who told me that it started in a past life. So I was like, oh. And at the time, I was getting my first Reiki certification, and my Reiki teacher, Brenda Martinez, with Soul Deep Life, she's great. She recommended I read Journey of Souls by Dr. Michael Newton. And I highly recommend that book, Journey of Souls and the sequel, Destiny of Souls, because it really gave me some insight on how reincarnation works. I was called to do what I call drunk time traveling. I poured myself a big old cup of mead, and because my thought process was, I don't want to make this up. I don't want my conscious mind to be interfering with whatever I see when I'm in trance, not knowing yet that I don't have to be inebriated to not be in control of what I'm seeing in trance. I was still very green. So I got drunk on mead, put on some shamanic drums, and entered my trance state and went to my most recent past life, where I found in that life I was a druidess, and I've always been called to Celtic culture. My whole family, my last name is Celtic, my whole family's Celtic, going back generations. We're originally from County Cork, Ireland. And what I found was that I was a druidess who had fallen in love with a Saxon. And one day, this Saxon soldier came to our village and killed us, all of us. They burned our village down and he murdered me.
Oh my
And the
God.
reason
That's an
is
abrasive past life experience.
in the vision, I saw after he did it, he left the village immediately instead of finishing sacking. This was in Tethbay in Ireland around 400 AD, 399 actually. And he went out on his horse and he just screamed up at the sky. And I knew as I'm watching this in third person, I knew that he lived the rest of his life in regret. And I also gained from this vision that he had been told by the church that I was making him stray from God because, of course, I wouldn't convert. I was a spiritual leader in my own community. And that betrayal, that was a deep wound that carried into this life and needed karmic healing. He also needed some karmic healing. And I've kicked around who he could be because I had another tarot reading that said that he's with me again in this life and things have healed. But I don't know if he is one of my partners, one of my teachers. I don't know if he's my ex, because that's another source of trauma. I don't know. But I do know that the answer to my question was, why do I feel so different? Well, it's because I've done this before. I've done this perhaps many times. And I dabbled a bit in starseed theory. And my conclusion is just that I have a mission here on Earth and I am aware of it, which is why I feel so different from people who may not be aware of their mission on Earth or what they're here to do.
Oh, I love that. That's beautiful. I personally have not gone down the starseed path or looked that far into it, but I know a lot of people have, and they have found lots of deep truths about themselves and help to align so many problems that are in their life and find ways that they can live in that authenticity. And it's very interesting because there's so many different active pieces of that. And in finding that identity and truly connecting with who you are, it's very it's very interesting. I will have to dive into that at some point for myself. I am just recently getting into the idea of past lives for myself. For a long time, I did not look into what past lives were because I personally really needed to find the present. And the present has always been really difficult for me. And that may be some point where like, my own identity comes into that, but I still struggle with that. With it being Pride Month, I've actually been struggling with like my own sexual identity and trying to come, not necessarily come to terms with it. I've known who I am and I have always been okay with it, but I have this weird guilt that it may be taking away from other people. So I'm currently working within that, which is a very, very interesting. And do you know how deep the starseed work goes? Like, does it give insights into those connective pieces for everyone, or is that something that you find was individual to your path?
I I think I want to start with a disclaimer of I don't necessarily see myself as a starseed, but I do subscribe to the idea that perhaps some souls don't originate on Earth. The word starseed has been covered in a couple other of thought, but it's been called other things. So Brown called them she called them like mystic travelers or something like that, and
Yes.
Newton referred to them as hybrid souls, whole souls that are human and also something else. So the word starseed refers to a specific group of, or I should say, a specific belief system within the idea, the umbrella of a soul that may not have started out on Earth. Um, I think for some people, hearing that you feel like an alien trying to fit in on Earth because you are, and that's kind of a, oh, I don't have to try so hard to fit into a box because I was never gonna fit in the box anyway. And that could apply to anyone, whether you identify as a starseed or not. It's the message of, hey, to stand in your truth, whatever that truth may be.
Okay. I like that. I like that a lot.
Uh,
So,
and
what personal difficulties, what have you had to like to terms with in yourself, or what was an obstacle that you found inside of yourself that you have had to come to really live in that alignment in your life?
for that, I want to talk about a couple of things. First of all, the big one, ego death. Because for the longest time, I didn't know what that was. I mistakenly thought ego death meant doing away with the ego. And I'm going to define ego here as the the identity of being a human. It's the accumulation of your thoughts, memories, experiences, and emotions of being the human being you are right now today. I thought that ego death meant doing away with all of that and not being vested in the human experience and being like this kind of disconnected, ethereal person who can't be bothered with human emotions and dramas and trials and tribulations. I was wrong. Ego death is when you change how you define yourself. So if you are a dentist and you lose your job, that's an ego death. You're not a dentist anymore. Now you are whatever the next thing is. If you go from not being a parent to suddenly being a parent, that's an ego death. Or anything, any part of your identity that changes and isn't the same anymore, that counts as an ego death. So learning that ego death just meant continuously redefining myself into something different or something that I decided is better was the first step. Some other things from that were personal accountability. And that bleeds into a whole can of worms of trauma because my whole life from childhood and even through some with my ex, and when I say my ex, of course, I've had many, but I mean one, the bad one, the abusive one. Um, in that situation and previous situations, learning accountability, taking accountability meant admitting, yes, I broke the plate. And saying that is also giving permission to harm me. Like it was with my parents, sorry, I broke the plate. Now I'm getting permission to be punished for breaking the plate. With my ex, if I were to say, yes, I broke the plate, that's permission to get, that are treated poorly for doing so. It took a lot of work to unlearn that and realize I can admit, yes, I broke the plate, but that doesn't have to mean I am allowing you to abuse me now. That was really difficult. And for the longest time, I struggled with it and I refused accountability. There's a quote I wrote here that I've seen on social media that says, accountability feels like an attack when you aren't ready to acknowledge that your actions affect others. That's true. And also, when you feel attacked because your previous experience has taught you, if you say, did you break the plate? And you say yes, you're saying, okay, you had to harm me. I really had to struggle on learning that that doesn't have to be how it goes after that.
That is something that resonates really, 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 really deep with me. That brings me to an idea of a whole episode idea that should be kind of because there is so much in these ideas and in these personal growths that comes from having traumatic experience with past partners or even with parents or really anybody that has that abusive hand in your life. Any of us and included. And that's something that I also still very much struggle with. I still very much question myself in a lot of the things that I do, wondering if I'm the word I'm looking for. If I'm like it's almost like I'm gaslighting myself. And it's like, is constantly going through what they said and what they held over my head and going through this and having to look myself in the face and be like, okay, that's not who you really are though. This is who you are and this is how you know making the right decisions. This is how you know you need to grow. And that could be a very sobering reality. And that is part of our identities.
I had a experience like the last 2 or 3 years has been I've been taking great strides in my growth. It's like I hit the fast track. I'm taking AP classes on Earth School right now.
Ooh.
And I had some wake up calls, several of them really, where I've had people, a finger at me and telling me what's wrong with me. And then I would, if it weren't for the great people in my life and my support system that I currently have, I would have internalized that and gone home going, I'm terrible. But it does help so much to have a support network. If you can build one, we talk about found family, especially in the LGBTQ community. We have found family everywhere, but it's not just for our group. Anyone can have a found family outside of blood relation if that's not healthy for you. And that support system can they can provide you that proof that like person says I'm terrible and oh maybe I am, but then you've got these people on your side that remind you, hey, no, wait a minute. This is, don't you remember who you are? You're this person. You're great. And it doesn't mean you're perfect. It doesn't mean you don't have things that you can improve on. It just means that you are still worthy of love and acceptance, even if someone over there is pointing fingers and have decided you're not worthy of their particular love. That doesn't mean you're not worthy of any love at all. Everyone is worthy.
Oh, yes. I think that that is also very apparent in growing acceptance in polyamory right now. There's a huge boom. I mean, without its own like back, because everyone kind of through that. But there is this huge boom of people accepting that they can live in these alternative lifestyles, and I'll use air quotes there. Um,
Yeah.
there's different ways to love and be and work through who you are. Is of interesting because we mentioned earlier about like Wood Witch and all of these pieces. And for me, my biggest piece has always been my spiritual identity and to kind of myself into that sobering reality, which I still love and adore her. There was a time when I myself was a very toxic quote unquote witch, big air quotes there. And so I actually got a tattoo from the craft on my
Oh
body.
yeah. Yep.
It is of Nancy. So
Oh yeah.
she was like, she at the time was so empowering for me. And she was very much this aspect of a person who was hurt and going through lots of difficulty that other people didn't understand, which is who I was. And I related so hard with that. And it took me forever to find who I was after that. So it's just very interesting, this idea of personal identity. If you had to if you identify your way yourself in any way, what would you say that it would be?
I, I'm of two minds about it because I said I got my start in Wicca and I was Wiccan for 10 years until I started seeing some of the criticisms toward it. And I'm not going to get into those, but some of those criticisms got me thinking. And I was like, okay, well then what's older than that? What's resonates deeper with me? And I told you I was the Celtic way has always resonated. So I was like, okay, let's look into Druidism then. And I found a Druid. He's older than I am. He's been doing this much longer. And he started teaching me the Druid way. And for a while, to my surprise, that completely threw off my entire faith. I stopped pretty much practicing altogether because I was confused. And it took me a bit to restart and build my own path. So now it's not Wiccan and it's not Druidic and it's not spiritualism, which is another concept that is very popular with older women in America, at least. I've uh, it's kind of my own unique path. It's a little bit of like a um, least the pomp and circumstance of it, because I really like the ritual aspect of Wicca. Um, it's a little bit of spiritualism because I have some theories that I with that also tie into Taoism. And then of what is in Taoism, I read the Tao Te Ching. I read Enchiridion, which is Stoic philosophy, and then I read philosophy, which is uh, I could be wrong here, Aztec Native American philosophy, and tied that together with what I had learned from my 2 years studying Druidism. So I've built a very unique, I would call it maybe a eclectic Celtic path.
Oh, I like
Eclectic,
that.
yeah. I've pretty much built it sort of from the ground up, and then even just as recent as last year, I built something, burned it down, and had to start over again, just because I was following a path and doing some exploration. I was doing a lot of learning, a lot of research. I was reading a lot, and then finding what resonated and concluding what didn't resonate. And the things that didn't resonate, I did let go of. So that's another ego death. I don't associate with those particular paths or traditions. So I set that down and reborn again as a new person, a new spiritualist, a new witch.
Oh yeah. I think that ego death has that connection with all different parts of our path. Um it comes in very interesting ways. It also kind of lead us into directions where we need to be. All comes a little bit more through that intuitive nature, but might be adjacent to the path that you're on. I had started a project with a friend of mine, and it was adjacent to what I was supposed to be doing, but that particular path did not align. And it was very difficult, and there were lots of obstacles, lots of pushback, and I couldn't really like make my way through it. And it took that ego death of me being like, okay, path is not my path. This path is her path. And that is where she is supposed to be. And mine looked similar, but was not the same. And I moved my project like into a different Venn diagram and it fell together and it was in alignment and it became this beautiful thing. Do you feel like you encompass that druidess still in you?
Certainly. At the end of the um or the vision I was having, and I was getting sick because I had way too much meat. I don't drink, by the way, and there's a reason for that. Um, as I was getting sick, I was in my mind still sitting with her, explaining to her this is part of your karma, because as I found out later, the reason I was treated that way as the druidess in that life is because in a previous life, going even farther back, I was a very terrible man. I harmed women often, and according to what I found when I was looking into that particular life, I enjoyed being that kind of person. It took several life cycles after that for me to that and learn my lesson and you know around. And the life as the druidess was probably the life that ended that karmic cycle finally, and the message clicked. And so it was a moment of soul growth, which is something we're all going through, and it can take many lives for those lessons to hit home. So the druid is still there, and I'm not going to demonize the bad man that I used to be in another life, because that was part of the journey too. And I haven't gone back farther than that because maybe there's a reason. I was like that too. It's all karmic cycles. It could be that I was playing the role for someone else who had once been a bad person. They needed to be mistreated by me in that life to pay their debt, which ticked off my life, and a whole domino effect of us always having these karmic cycles to flush and redeem and live through and circle back. And I don't think it's so much the what happens in the active life. It's when we're done with that incarnation and we look back on what happened. What did we learn? How did we grow? Why did we take those actions? Did it come from a place of not not knowing better or needing to know better? Did it come from a place of selfishness or pride or vanity or some weakness or flaw in our self? Or was it a conscious doing to assist another soul with their karmic cycle? And I think all of those factors matter. So yeah, the gratuitous is still in me. I think everyone I've ever been is still a part of me because the soul identity, the higher self, the immortal person that each of us is, that person is with us in some aspect, no matter what human identity we take on each incarnation.
Oh, that's a beautiful way to look at it. I love that. That was like a beautiful little ending there. That's so cute. Do you think that this and that those particular soul identities, do you think that that ties into your identity as being non-binary?
Absolutely. I have a whole spiel on that. uh, uh, Start that here. I'll start first with a definition of myself when it comes to being non-binary, because each person within the non-binary spectrum is going to define themselves differently, just as a person who identifies as a woman defines femininity differently, and every person who is a man also defines what it means to be a man for them. So for me, if there was a line, on one side of the line, we have some people who identify wholly as men, and on the other side, people who identify wholly as women. I fall somewhere in the middle. And if I were to place a dot on that line, it would be slightly closer to the male side, but definitely still in the middle, if that makes sense.
Oh yeah.
That leads me to a story. One time I was the reader scheduled to work at Spirituality, the metaphysical shop I help out at. And a woman came in for a reading, and it's not that was seeking me out specifically. She just came in for a reading from a reader, and I happened to be the one who was there. And she got her reading. We went ahead with it, and some very powerful messages came through for her. And one of the things she told me during the reading was, I hate men. I'm afraid of men. And when that happened, when she said that, two things simultaneously happened in my head. One was, oh, she doesn't see me. She's unintentionally misgendering me. She, the woman in this chair, hurts. It hurts whether you're non-binary, transgender, or a cis straight person. It hurts to not feel seen, and it doesn't matter who you are. And at the same exact moment I had that thought, I had another thought that was, she would not have heard the message today if she had perceived anything but a woman in that chair. And so I realized it has nothing to do with me. She saw what she needed to see. I was not there. I move out of the way. I'm just a vessel to deliver a message from spirit, from source to her. Whatever she sees sitting in the chair says nothing about me and everything about her.
Oh yeah,
And
that
so,
a common projection I have noticed is and not necessarily in a bad way, how a lot of people talk about projection these days, but when you're going in and you're looking for help, sometimes that help has to be the mirror that you need it to be.
Exactly. That's my next point, is that we are all mirrors. And usually when someone looks at you, what they see there, sometimes it aligns with who you would say you are. And that's how we get our close friendships, is we feel seen by people who their projected version of you is pretty close to what's actually there. But then there are people who either purposefully or accidentally look at you and they see someone who doesn't exist. They see an imaginary version of you kind of in front of you. And I've had to deal with that a lot. There are people out there that think I'm just the worst. And I talked about having people in your corner, because I'll turn around and be like, hey, am I the worst? And I've got people going, no, I'm a point with here, this or that. Or they'll turn around and tell me, no, they are way off base. They have no idea what they're talking about. And it helps keep me grounded, because I want to be accountable, but I also don't want to be, you know, I'm garbage when I'm not actually.
Oh,
So
yeah.
in mind that we're a mirror, we reflect what other people see, and that it applies, ways when I'm interacting with someone else. I try to keep in mind my own projections, though it sometimes even I get kind of caught up in the projection itself, and uh, always keep track of that. But
Oh,
that's
yeah.
the ego mind and the soul mind. The soul mind knows better. The soul comes from love and acceptance. There's this inherent do things from love, not for love. The soul mind always moves from love, where the ego tends to move for love. We're searching for that acceptance. And that's not a bad thing. It's not, it's simply human nature. It's the human condition. We're not going to get away from that without a lot of work. I don't want to demonize that, but it's definitely my Toltec philosophy book said, imagine being on Earth is like being at a party and everybody's drunk except you. And whenever you get caught up in the drama and the problems and the craziness, you've gotten drunk too. And it's like you need to sober up, step back, and be like, why am I arguing with this person? They're just someone who's drunk at a party. I'm gonna go do my own thing. And, and I like being able to kind of myself for getting caught up in the crazy, but then also kind of back to square one and go, okay, where am I? Where are the people around me? And also try not to pass judgment. That was another thing I came across, was um, start finding these communities that talk about things like being awake or being conscious, achieving consciousness. There's kind of a hierarchy of power where you start to feel like maybe you're better than other people, and you got to watch that, check that, because we're all on a journey, and we're not, people who are more advanced than others are not better than people who are not as advanced. We're all just players on the same, you know, game board. Nobody's better than anybody else. We're just in different places.
I feel the exact same about the consciousness groups and people. And I also want to, we're all conscious. We all have higher consciousness. And
Oh, yes.
if you don't mind me asking, what's the name of your Toltec book?
It is called it is called The Mastery of Self by Don Miguel Ruiz Jr.
I knew that was going to be by Don Miguel Ruiz Jr. He also wrote The Four Agreements. And
I
that
haven't
is
read
a
that one.
book that like out to everyone Because the
That's
idea is to remove yourself from this idea that you have to achieve higher consciousness, when really
right.
all you have to do is remove those veils.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
I
And what's amazing is if you read the Tao Te Ching, which is the Taoist philosophy book, it kind of touches on the same things, surprisingly, which is what struck me. Like, have these two cultures from completely different sides of the world that came to the same conclusions.
Oh, yeah. I could get into the history of conscious civilizations, and that would be like a whole other hour because there's so much. And when you start getting into all of these different ideas of cultures that, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Cultures where really shut them out. I was talking to someone about this recently because we were talking about psychology. And as you know, I'm going to school for psychology. And one of the largest things that I have learned is that white European men totally shut out all of these Eastern ideas because they have been working with what we call a pseudoscience, like chakras and all of these systems for thousands of years and have already related it to psychology and psychotherapy. And we were like, no, no, that cannot be right. And as we evolve and uncover all of them, we're looking at it and we're like, but they all make sense and they're lining up here, guys. Like, we should probably pay attention to these
um,
other cultures.
yeah, a bit where you had talked about and spirituality. Um, Gears a bit. In Dr. Michael Newton's books, Journey of Souls and Destiny of Souls, he touches a bit on this, um, that the soul is androgynous. We come from source, and source, however you define it, is all that is or will be, all that ever has been. It's the accumulation of all human identities, men, women, and everything in between or outside of the that binary. And every soul is a piece of that energy. And we are energy. We're energy and light, every one of us. However, even souls can have a disposition towards more masculine or more feminine, even if they are just light. There is no gender per se, but more of a disposition. And I like saying that gender for the soul is a disposition, not a definition. I thought that was clever.
Oh, I love
and
that. That is a beautiful way to word that.
and so Dr. Newton had said this, so I can't take credit for it, but he had said that um, could be suggested that some people who identify outside of the binary, maybe on some level, either consciously or unconsciously, we remember what it's like to be a soul, what it's like to say gender is a disposition and not a definition. You can have a masculine soul who chooses to incarnate as a human female, or a feminine soul that chooses to incarnate as a masculine human being, a male human. And you've got people who are intersex, you have people who are non binary, agender, demigender, and all of these different definitions. Maybe we somehow remember the spirit world where gender is not a thing. I mean, it's a part of how you feel, and it really does go off of your feelings rather than your physical self, because in the spirit world there is no physical self. I think, and now this part's my theory, the more of us that stand in our truth, that bring more diversity, more inclusion, more color to the world, it's like we're bringing the spirit world here to Earth. It's like we're making Earth more like home because that's what the spirit world is. That's our home. That's where we all come from. That's the place we go back to when we're done at Earth school, you know. I think the more of us that can speak on who we are, who can live authentically, the closer we all as a collective, like just by being yourself, you bring everybody, the whole collective closer to source.
That is a truly beautiful way to look at this. And I had not thought about it that way. That's a wonderful message as far as like yourself into that alignment. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. I came up with that this morning as I was writing out what I was gonna say here. So
Oh, that is so beautiful. I love that. Like that has me like contemplating. See a lot of you were talking about it. I can see a lot of understandings of I don't know how much you know about the teachings and understandings of Shiva and Parvati.
oh, I'm not familiar actually.
So he is Shiva's like one of the big godheads of Hindu mythology, and Parvati was his wife. But there is a lot of understanding that they were absorbed as one. And so when you see lots of statuaries of Shiva, he is both male and female, and he walks between that line for he encompasses the entire experience.
Exactly, yeah.
I
And
had
I
not put it into that like theory like played until now.
I did want to briefly touch on who we all face our own individual challenges. Every person, regardless of whether they're part of the LGBTQ rainbow or not, is going to face, you know, throughout their life, they're going to be challenged. And I don't want to say anyone's challenge are more than another's because it's all subjective and we're all on the same journey. I said we're all still the same pawns on the same big game board, so nobody's better than anyone else. But the challenges of, and Dr. Newton talked about this, the LGBTQ rainbow and people who identify that way are unique to them. And it could be that as we struggle to advance ourselves through these unique struggles, it doesn't mean that we contribute more or less than someone who doesn't identify that way. I think we all have something important to bring to the table and should overshadow anyone else. But I also feel our voices should be heard.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Oh, I love that. And these are is this was the same author that wrote The Journey of Souls and The Destiny of Souls?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
It was so brief. I forget. It's one of the last chapters in one of the two books where he talks about how more advanced souls tend to come to Earth and be born as someone who ends up being gay or bisexual, lesbian, transgender, non-binary, somewhere, anywhere in the rainbow. Um, and I don't want people to hear, oh, more advanced souls are, you know, I don't want them to feel like there's some kind of hierarchy or we're better off or something. That's not what it's about. But it does kind of reassurance of you're here for a reason. You have work to do. And whatever that work is, on and get to it, you have the power to overcome your challenges.
Oh, I think that is wonderful. I think that is a beautiful way to look at it that keeps it honestly don't know the word that I'm looking for there. It keeps it very connected to the community in that idea. And lifting that voice up. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah.
It's, yes, no one's experience. I'm a big fan that, yes, no one's experience is supposed to be better than one another's. I am a fan of identity and really stepping into that. And these are also communities where, one, there's this whole idea of like that I could talk about for forever. Um,
Yes.
is not the topic of today. uh, there's the other voices have been so loud for so long that we have clearly come to a huge disconnect. I mean, apparent, no matter who you are or what community you're in. And without magnifying these voices and understanding their place in the larger community as a whole, then the whole translation gets lost.
Because while I, as a non-binary person, I can talk about the androgyny of the soul and how that translates into my life, but then there's probably someone out there who's listening, a cis woman who doesn't understand the trans experience. She'll never have to understand the non-binary experience or the trans experience. But as a spiritualist, that person may still have very important things to contribute to the whole world, and it's not that her contributions value more or less than mine do, but it's still there's equality where we all need to hear each other.
Yes. For any of you all who may to this who have taken like courses and you go through the ideas of like ideas of bias in research and the ideas of bias in like experiences, this is why you have to go across multiple kinds of sources because no one's going to have the same experience as the next person, but they all need to be seen.
Oh yeah, I put that disclaimer in here too. My flavor, if you will, of being non-binary is going to be different from the next person who also identifies as non-binary. It's going to be different for everybody.
Yes.
So,
Thank you for being so vulnerable with us and sharing your path and all of these experiences. It's been truly beautiful. Thank you so much.
oh, of course.
Is there anything else that you feel like anyone needs to know or that you need to share or anything that is upcoming that you would like to share in your that they need to know about?
I have just one to kind of and leave with, which is once again, the more you stand in your truth and be authentically you, the closer we all as a collective move toward the source. Other than that, I don't have anything coming up. Can be found, of course, at Spring Spirituality Metaphysical Shop here in Colorado Springs. I offer my services worldwide through my website at www.amberdrakearts.com.
Yes, and I will plug all of that information into the show notes as well. And again, thank you so much for joining me and for again being so vulnerable. This has been an absolute treasure.
Thank you so much.